Well, I'd like to take you through my epic journey of creating a Minion sculpture. And I saw this compressor in a dumpster. Someone had thrown it away, that it was obviously non-functional. And I just had a vision. I visualize it's the perfect uh, basis for a sculpture, steel sculpture of a Minion. It's perfect. And it's one of the taller Minions. I think Kevin is the name of the Minion. And so that's what I'll be replicating here. So I extracted the tank from the frame here. There's a lot of heavy welds. I ground these welds off. There was a little manufacturer's nameplate. I cut that off. And then there was all these little threaded ports for air connections. And I literally just took my cut off disc and just cut these out. And then I cut out some eighth of an inch thick sheet metal and welded them back in and ground it flush just to give that tank a nice finish. And I removed all of that paint, whatever that coating was on there. So here's the hands. I cut these hands out. Spent a lot of time drawing these in CAD and perfecting these shapes. So I cut out 4 of these. Each hand gets 2, build up the thickness. And I really wanted to get the proportions right. I did a lot of mock-ups on paper and cutting them out, tracing them to get the proportions proper to the body size. And I think I achieved that. And the hands will have a little cuff. They have a little glove the Minion's wearing, a little cuff. And then once most of the mock-up's done, I cut these fingers off and I weld a little spherical piece of steel on the little end digit. The thumb and the fingers are very rounded and spherical. So I welded that up on there and blend that, but that's later on in the project. So for the arms, I use my hydraulic forge press, and I ended up squaring off this tubing. It's not really squared. It's almost like a rectangular, I put on this, and this forge press is rated for like 40 tons. This is like I'm using hardly any pressure on this. This press will just crush this tubing, no problem. But this is where the wrist, where it transitions to the wrist, and so this is why I'm squaring this off and flattening these edges, and it'll all be covered by the cuff, the Minion's little glove. So. You'll see here, I got these prepped. I cleaned up both sides. I'm ready to weld it to one of the arms. And these hands, they took up more time than the goggles of the Minion did. But I had to work. I had to make sure I get these right. They were critical for the visual of this piece. So I tack weld these hands on the arms. These arms are 1-inch tubing. Just a slight radius I put on these arms, and it came out perfect. I kind of picked one picture of the Minion, and I kind of based my sculpture off this one picture. I just kind of pick the expression, the shape of the mouth, and everything, and the arm position, the arms. I just kind of had to stick to this one picture I found. So here's the goggles. Goggles started out as 3-inch diameter. Tubing with a eighth of an inch wall thickness, 0.125. Now these goggles are way taller than they need to be, if you notice here, and that's intentional. I'm actually going to chop about a 1-inch off of the edge at the end of one of these, and they're going to form the double thickness. There's a little bezel, I think you would call it, a little bezel detail around the goggles. You'll notice on a picture if you look at a picture in a Minion. And so here I am doing the contouring. So I contour this piece, and I want this fit up around the main body where the goggles are radiused. I spent a lot of time on this, getting this, just perfecting that fit up. And actually it was just a couple of tacks that held it on, but I just wanted that. I didn't want a bunch of huge gaps between it, and so I spent a lot of time curving this, checking it, grinding it, checking it, grinding it, checking it. So I spent a lot of time on that, and It was just necessary for the aesthetics of this piece. Sometimes the piece dictates to you kind of what you need to do, and so I spent a lot of time on this, but it was worth it. So on this next part here, I am splitting these pieces off. You see I've cut that 1 inch tall section. Those come off there. Now I'm going to split those. I'm going to separate those, and I'm going to cut that little center section on each of them, and they're going to slip over the outside of the goggles. They're going to slip over the outside. And then for that detail, you'll see here I've separated one out, and I'm going to cut. Just use my a disc grinder. Just cut a little center section out. Now it's noted to word at this point because you'll see later on in the video. I don't really show it that much, but I tack weld. There's little screws around the outside of these, about every 3/4 of an inch radially. Now on these, I actually just tack welded a bead and domed it just a little bit with my grinder, and then I used a Dremel, a very fine disc, and I cut a little screw head. So that's how I approximated the look of the screw head on these pieces. And so here you see they just slip fit right over. And once they're kind of in place, I put a little tack weld on them. Which probably really isn't really necessary. They're pretty tight in place. But I put a little tack weld on them, and then I ground that whole face flush. Ground that flush. So here you can see the detail where I'm putting those tack welds on, and for the screws that are in the goggles, and these are the little side pins that I welded in place, and I ground a little relief in them. Looks like the picture shows, and I got those tack welded in place. Now the strap here, you can see the strap has it's a little thicker, and I almost debated about making this out of leather or fabric or something, but I ended up going with steel. And I actually tack welded it to the tank and bent it. I used the tank itself as a mandrel to bend that strap, and that strap is an 1/8 of an inch thick material, about 1.25 inches tall, and it came out perfect. And those little side pins came out really nice. Now I took a break from the goggles, and I moved on to the legs. Now the legs I made in 2 pieces. I'm actually going to be sewing some denim overalls for this Minion Sculpture, and so I wouldn't be able to get the overalls on if I just welded the feet on. So I actually made the legs, and I made the feet removable, so I could kind of like dress them and then put the feet on. So these legs kind of have a 2-piece, but here I am just setting the proportions, measuring from the edges, getting the fit up just right, and making sure. And these are slightly curved. There's a little bit of a curvature to these. It wasn't a perfect fit up, like I got it close, and then I tack welded it in place. So you'll see in the next shot, I'm on my lathe, and I'm machining a piece of solid bar stock that's actually going to slip fit inside these leg tubes. These leg tubes are going to be drilled and tapped for a set screw, and then the foot and the lower part of the leg will slip fit inside this tubing, and the set screw will tension into place. And that's how I can kind of quote unquote dress the Minion, get the coveralls on, and then put the legs and install the legs. And so it really wasn't that much work, but I had to turn a few pieces, and then I had to drill and tap some holes. But now it's really starting to, legs came out perfect, nice and even, so I'm really happy with it. Now here's the feet. Now I actually had to cut a lot of these out, and I stacked them on top of each other. Um, I looked at maybe getting a solid chunk of steel and grinding it and shaping it, and it just was so much work. So what I actually did is I programmed my plasma, cut several thicknesses of this out, and I stacked them on top of each other, and then welded them. So that's how it just was a very easy way for me to approximate the shape. And then it got beveled and contoured even more. But you can see here, I'm doing the shape of the little foot. And once again, I don't show this, but I started out with a mock-up on paper and really fine-tune the size of that to get the scale proper. So here's some round stock. I'm doing a turning operation. I'm reducing its diameter down, so it's just a slip fit inside those leg tubes. And once it's inside those leg tubes, it'll be held in place by a 1/4 20 set screw. So, yeah. So you'll see me stop. I'll shut down. I'll test this arm and make sure this fits properly. Now here I'm parting this off. You'll see it'll drop right off onto the cross slide of the lathe. And it came out really nice. I made 2 of these, and this gets welded. Each one gets welded to the feet. So here's the next video here. I'm going to be welding these up. I just got them positioned properly, took some measurements, made some marks with a Sharpie, got these welded up. And then the other thicknesses of the foot will be added after this is in. I just wanted to get these fit up and get this mocked up, and then I have a bunch of the other sections of feet that get welded onto it. And then once they're all welded up, I actually ground and radius the top of his foot. And I cut in the little boot heel and ground that little detail in and radiused a few of the parts. So I did quite a bit of shaping and contouring on these feet just to get it right. And I believe ultimately it was worth it. Here we are. There's the feet doing the happy dance. So I got a number 7 drill bit. I'm going to drill these out and run a tap in these. And so these set screws will hold the feet in place. And so I just did number 7 drill bit. Now normally when you're tapping, you go in a turn, you back out half a turn or 3/4. There's a procedure to tapping. You never want to just tap all the way through. But the wall thickness on this wasn't like I was tapping a solid piece of steel, so I just ran the tap all the way through. And it wasn't binding or anything. It was easy just to run the tap through and then back it out. So it worked fine. But normally when you're tapping, there's a procedure. You go in a turn and back out a turn, something like that. But I'm just fitting these up. The feet don't quite, these feet haven't been, haven't had the subsequent thicknesses and everything in it. So, but you'll see that later. So here's what I want for the eyes. Now these eyes, I just end up using some salad spoons. And it had to be these eyes had to have a curvature to them. So I end up using the salad spoons and trimming them off and getting them kind of contoured to slip fit inside there. So I'm happy with that curvature, and I'm just doing some tack welds to hold them in place, and then I'm actually going to weld a pupil onto them too, and I use a washer for that. So here you can see I'm just going to do some tack welds on this, and I got these spoons at a thrift store for next to nothing. So that was a cost. I think I paid like it came in a whole pack. It was like $4, and it had like a bunch of spoons and forks and whatnot. But so I welded these up, and I cleaned the face of these. There's a little bit of heat discoloration. I cleaned these with some 400 grit sandpaper. It actually came out really good. I was really happy with the surface finish with the spoon and the 400 grit sandpaper. I was going to polish them and go to 600 and go to 800 and 1,000, etc. But after I ran the 400 grit, and got any of the welding discoloration. It just looked perfect. So I just left it. I called it good after the 400 grit. So you see, these came out really nice. Moving on to the pupil. Now, you'll see on this, I used a washer back on my hydraulic press here, and I use a ball peen hammer, and I have a little piece of steel I've machined. It's like a very thick tube, so it's hollow in the center, and I have a washer there, and there's no bottom curvature. I'm eyeballing this dome shape, and using I'm feathering this with my hydraulic valve here, and I'm just gonna put enough curve in this so it fits on the curvature of those spoons for the eyes. And here you can see just a little bit of curvature. That's all it's needed. And I check this up. I do 2 of these, and it's actually was very repeatable actually, and I was really happy with this setup. And I made the mandrel on my lathe. I think it took me like 5 minutes. So I press this down, get that dome shape, and it's always fun when I get to cold form steel or use the forge press. I do a lot of blacksmithing too, and so I use the forge press for hot operations, but I like these pressing operations, are fun. So here it is. I'm just going to weld up this. I'm welding through these eyes. Now these eyes aren't centered. They're a little closer together than if you look at a picture of a Minion. They're not perfectly centered. So I had to study these pictures a lot to get these right. But I welded through, and you can burn through these spoons. I had to get the heat setting a little less than what I would normally have for that thickness, but I just welded these up and welded that whole solid, and then ground that back flush. So you can see I use a flap disc. I'm going to get that back flush, and I was a little concerned that the filler metal would be a little bit different optically than the washer, and I thought it might show, like you'd see the weld and it would have a difference from the base metal, but it wasn't the case at all. After I ground these flush, you really couldn't even see the weld at all, and came out. I could not believe how good everything was, just working out perfect on this project. Here it is, and I'm just so happy with these goggles, the strap, the little pins on the side. You can see just have some tacks holding those legs. You can see kind of the finished shape of some of the legs there and the feet. So it's really starting to come. The goggles are really starting to shape and come to life. Now I'll be tacking these arms on. I did a lot of, you don't see it, I don't show it in the video. It's probably pretty boring, but I did a lot of measuring on the side of this tank. I had to get these proportions right. I didn't want the arms to be too tall or too high up or too low. It was just get these arms at the right height were critical on it, and pretty much achieved that. Did a lot of measuring, looked at a lot of pictures, and actually did some mathematical proportions. Nothing fancy, just something very simple to get these these proportions correct. So, and here you can see I have a loose mock-up of the mouth. I drew that out in a Sharpie, and just to kind of I had to mark that, make sure that was centered, because the picture I had, the mouth is offset a little bit. It wasn't perfectly centered. So I had to make sure, once again, I was going off this one picture. I had to kind of commit to that drawing. And so that's what I did. But it's really starting to take shape here. This is the hardest part. We have a saying a lot of times, 90% done, 90% left to go. And it really is true. A lot of projects, you reach a point where it really starts to take shape, but then, you feel like you've made so much progress, but it's almost like the same amount of progress is still, you reach this big milestone and it's still like the same amount of work left, but now you can see it's really taking shape. So I drilled a starter hole and I'm running my Makita reciprocating saw here, and I think I didn't quite have there's a tooth count, like for depending on the thickness of material you're supposed to cut, and I didn't have it quite right, um, but it worked fine. This actually cuts pretty fast, and so and you can actually turn a pretty tight radius with this little saw. But this cut came out perfect. I ended up actually tracing the cut on a piece of paper. And well, actually, my daughter did. And my daughter got this shape just perfect, and she actually taped it up and got it centered properly for me. She has an eye for these things, so I kind of relied on her for that. But thanks, Gabby. Daddy's happy with the way it turned out. And so my daughter has just the eye for symmetry and proportion, just like you would not believe. She's a true artist. So I enlisted her to help get the shape of this mouth. But here it is. It came out perfect. This is the raw cuts. This hasn't been touched up with a grinder or anything. These are the raw cuts from that. So it just came out perfect. It's really starting. I'm getting so close. And so moving on to the hair. Um, most of the drawings or pictures of the minion you see, some of them have 11, 9. I don't know if it was me counting them improperly, but it was somewhere. So I kind of just arbitrarily picked kind of a count that was kind of similar to the pictures. And I cut these to length. I beveled the ends. And a lot of them I bent by hand. I actually used the tank to bend um, the hair. And so I cut them different lengths and got them, and they're not omnidirectional. They kind of split, one to one side, one to the other side. So I used 1/8 of an inch mild steel for these, and then my wife actually had too much of a. They came to a point. My wife said, "You better, you know." So I did. I put a little flat on there, per the wife's instruction, and made them not as sharp. So the teeth, this part was really fun, believe it or not. The teeth was I profiled this. I cut shaped these in the grinder, and this is actually pretty significant thickness. It's about 0.175, almost 3/16 of an inch thick, but this came out. It came out perfect. Now I have to radius this. Now you'll see I just have a forged D-ring. It's used to weld it on trailers and whatnot. I just have it setting in there, and I have a piece of round stock I'm using. I'm using my press, and I'm just putting some bends in this, and I move it over and doing a little bend. I slowly approximated this curve. And I didn't have to get this perfect because I was going to C-clamp it to the inside, and that would kind of made up the parts a little better. But I had to get it somewhat close because it's a thicker piece of steel. And I could have used some sheet metal, something I could have cut with snips, but this thick plate really gave it the depth. It really looked like teeth. And so I got this pretty close, this bend, this radius, and then and got it fit up. And I clamped it in place, and it 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 came out perfect. So once again, I used the clamps. Once I put it inside of the tube, the C clamps kind of sucked it in and gave it the rest of the contour. So I didn't get this radius perfect. I just had to get it close enough to fit up. So here you can see I got it C clamped up, and I'm going to run a bead through that hole. I drilled a hole in there. I'm going to do a rosette weld, and I'm running a pretty good amount of heat on this. So I'm not going to burn through. It's much thicker steel, but that weld is actually going to lock that in place. And then I'm going to grind that back flush. You won't even see it, but it worked out perfectly. I had the clamp pulled in, and I had that clamped up tight, welded it, and ground that back flush, and boom, now the teeth. His expression, his mouth opening is off center a little bit per the picture I was using. So you look at the teeth, they don't look centered, but the teeth are actually centered to the body, not the mouth opening. The mouth opening shifted over a little bit. So I touched up this a little bit of places here and there and ground that weld, and now it's really starting to come to shape. So here I am sewing the coveralls, and I cut the pockets off of the back of one of my jeans, one of my old work jeans. And one of the pockets is going to kind of be the front flap, and the other pocket's going to kind of be the back flap. And now I don't show it, but I actually cut the waist off of two jeans because they already had the riveted little uh, uh, a hole that was cut for the latch, and so I reutilized, so I didn't have to sew those on or get some buttons or something, and so I just reutilized the attachment points that were already on the jeans. So I cut these off and kind of folded these back over and stitched the edges. And then I don't show the straps, but they're basically the waist cut off. Now I already have the two pieces attached that form the main body of the overalls. Now I'm hemming these. This is the smallest hem I've ever done, by the way, and this is actually pretty hard to try and hem up these little jeans that are, the opening is 1.25 inches or 1.5 inches in diameter, and so that was difficult to do. That was difficult, but. And so here I am fitting it up and putting the legs on, putting the feet on. You can see it's just a little set screw. The feet go in. You tighten the bolt up, it locks it in place. You can pivot them to kind of get the right angle that you're looking for. And so I tighten these up, and it's so close. I'm so close to getting done on this. All that's left to do is the hands, the little cuff from the glove, and the fingers, and this is done. This is at this stage in the project. This project took a little bit of time, guys, and you can almost kind of get burnt out a little bit. You're working on something, you're chipping away at it, and you just have to keep going. But at this point, I really started getting excited. It was that the finish line is in sight, right? You're running or doing something, you can see the end. This what you're watching right now is at that point where I was almost done. I'm like, man, this is. So here's the hands. I reworked the hands, and I cut the fingers off and welded these 1-inch ball bearing for the two smaller digits. Now the thumb I machined on my lathe. I don't show it, but it's a bigger diameter. So I wanted like 1.25 inches, 1.125 inches, something like that. And I rounded those up on my lathe. And I got those. I welded them in, and I blended that transition, and then they came out. They came out really good. And so here's a shot as a 1-inch diameter ball bearing I used. You buy those. I think they were like a couple bucks each. Now the cuff, I don't show me welding the cuff. I don't have any shots of that, but I will show you how I marked it up. I drew this shape on some tubing. This is I think this is 1.5 inch diameter tubing, I think, or 1.25 inches. And I drew this little profile on here. Now I cut this out, and then I was able to weld and kind of hammer and weld and hammer. And so that's how I shaped these cuffs. I didn't get them shaped totally and then weld them on there. I welded and then hammered and welded and hammered, and I got that the shape of the little wrist cuff. That's the glove of the little minion hand. So that was the last part I welded on, and this is it, guys. You can see the little wrist cuffs from the gloves. You can see all the detail here, and so it just came out perfect. All the hairs, the details on the little screw heads on the goggles. It just came out so perfect. The mouth, the teeth proportions. I'm really happy with the gloves, the way the gloves look. And so it's just it just came out. I'm just so happy with it. The little pin detail for the straps, the shoes. The shoes came out perfect. The little boots. So really like it, and the coveralls just add a really nice touch. Now I drew some little eyes with a Sharpie. And let me guys, why don't you guys tell me what you think? Do you think it should just be bare steel, and or have or or have the eyes? I don't know what I went back and forth on this, but I have it here and show the eyes, and then you can see the hem I did on the pants. So this was a lot of work, guys, but this was very rewarding. And I really want to, if you guys hung in to the end of this video, I want you guys to pat yourself on the back. You hung in there. This was a long one, 30 minutes, but I think I had like almost 20 hours of video to compile this in the 30 minutes. So I really appreciate you guys watching this. Thank you for your time, and hope you guys are doing well. Thank you.